Okay.
All right, welcome everyone. And so just to sort of reiterate what I said before, this meeting is for both mentors, but especially for mentees to get a general idea of how this process goes for applying to PhD programs in psychology and adjacent areas. We encourage, because Hannah and I and a lot of the mentors are more specifically focused on or have experience with cognitive, we encourage mentors who know more about other fields, clinical, educational, that kind of stuff, to jump in, especially in the chat, if there's stuff that you want to sort of qualify or explain that might be different in your particular area. Mentees, also please make ample use of the chat. I'm going to be doing my best to monitor it, as will the other people on the mentoring committee. I'm sorry, I'm Eileen Yee. I'm professor of psychological sciences at University of Connecticut. I should have started with that. Hannah Morrow is going to be our fearless leader. She is a graduate student in psychological sciences at University of Connecticut. So all of our mentors, I think, are UConn faculty and grad students and postdocs. But our mentees are both UConn undergrads and undergrads from elsewhere. But everyone's considering pursuing a PhD in psychology or adjacent areas. So with respect to, Sahil mentioned, if you're not talking, it's probably a good idea to mute yourself until you have a question or want to say something. With respect to the matching, we did a marathon matching sessions, people on the mentoring committee. And so everybody is matched, all the mentees are matched with a graduate student and a faculty mentor. And we did our absolute best to match you with people based on your area of interest. And as specific as we could get. Of course, we couldn't be perfect in all ways. Sometimes there were like 8 people who would have perfectly matched with one mentor, but that mentor could only take 2 students, that kind of thing. But we did our absolute best. And I'm working on sending out all the contact information to everyone about their mentors and mentees. I'll do that. I should be able to send those out in the next couple of days. Not every single grad mentor had a mentee matching you on this round, but we expect that we'll sort of continue things going forward. But you'll hear from me regardless very soon. Okay, are there any other questions before we get started? Let me see if I see any hands. Or you could just unmute yourself and fire away.
I have a quick question. Are the mentees likely to get both a faculty mentor and a grad mentor? Because I could imagine people's comfort level addressing questions to such people might differ.
Yes. So exactly for that reason, we matched each mentee with one grad and one faculty mentor. Okay, any other questions before we get started? All right, well, let's do it. I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to.
Okay, great. So we have some slides prepared for you all. I'm gonna work on sharing that really quick if I can pull them up. Great. Okay, so like it's been said already, if you aren't asking a question or presenting, we're just going to ask that you can mute yourself. And let's see how I have this set up. Let's see if this is gonna work the way I want it to. Okay, hopefully you're all seeing it in presentation mode and not the like, here's the next slide thing.
We're seeing the next slide.
Ooh, okay, that's fun.
You need to change that, Hannah. If you go back to your, leave this open, but go back to, I'm also showing it to us now. That's fine. Maybe you fixed it.
Yeah, I figured I just had to swap displays. It used to give me a border, but now it doesn't, but that's okay. Anyway, so like we said before, if you have questions, you can unmute your mic. If you, we used to have the hand raise feature. I'm not seeing it, but that could be because I'm hosting. Eileen, is there a hand raise feature? You're like nodding. You're not seeing it either. Okay.
I'm not seeing it either, no.
So if you click on participants at the bottom, once you've clicked on participants, there's an option to raise your hand within that window.
Okay, great. And I see that some of you are testing that out. So yep, you can do that for questions. You can put them in the chat, whichever way you think works best for you. We are going to save the chat after this, as well as this being recorded, so things will be available afterward if there's a question that's asked and you really wanted to know the answer. We're going to try to make sure this doesn't take too long, but this is the first time that we're running this program, so we do welcome any input you have, as well as if you feel like you know the answer to a question that's being asked in the chat, feel free to put that in there. Yeah, and with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So, okay. So one question that comes up a lot now that we're kind of talking about this is kind of what exactly are you getting into if you're looking into applying to grad school? And so for us, well, I say for us, so again, I'm a grad student in psychology, so that's why a lot of this is going to be related to psych. As Eileen said earlier, we're coming from this cognitive psychology perspective, although we do have some people that we've collected for mentors that are from linguistics, speech, language, and hearing sciences, clinical programs. So we do have some variation, but a lot of us are cognitive psych focused. So for most psych-related graduate programs, grad school is going to look like about a 1 to 3 year master's program that is going to cost you money in tuition. But if you decide instead to go to a full 5-year PhD program, where you usually tend to pick up a master's along the way, that's going to pay for your tuition, your insurance, as well as it will also pay you. So that's one difference between the master's and the PhD. We're going to kind of talk about that a little bit more, but for right now, the timeline for the PhD looks roughly like this. Like this is how you're going to spend those 5-ish or so years. So for the first couple years, this is when most of your classes are going to be done. So I think most people don't take more than like 3 courses in a semester because you are now spending your time doing research. So it's different from undergrad where normally you would take like 5 courses. Now it's expected that you take maybe 2 or 3 in a semester. So you do most of your classes then, and you will hopefully be preparing and hopefully running your actual master's thesis experiment. And then you move on to year 3. So this is usually when people are receiving their master's degree and they start preparing for, we call these our qualifying exams. That looks different in different places. So for our program, we have to write 2 review papers on 2 different topics that are going to cover like a breadth of information as well as depth of information. And you get to talk about that with your advisor. For other places, you're looking at, you have to read so many papers within a certain amount of time, and then you're going to get questions about those topics and you have to respond to them within like 2 weeks or something like that. It does vary. Sometimes you can find this information on the website of the program. And sometimes it's also just helpful for you to ask maybe current grad students there if you're looking into a program. And we'll talk about how to find a program as well in a few other slides. So you do that. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of reading and a lot of writing. You can make it through it. That's what I keep telling myself. And then in years 4 and 5, this is when you will hopefully pass your exams. And then you propose, conduct, write, and defend your dissertation, and then receive your PhD. So again, this dissertation this is another experiment usually. So after you've done your exams, usually some of the topics that you've written on might help inform the topic that you want to create an experiment for. So you draft up, here's why I want to do it. Here's the experiment I want to do. You talk to your committee about it. They give you their input, and then you collect the data, you analyze it, you write it up, and then you give a presentation about it. So that's what that propose, conduct, write, and defend entails. And just again, these are rough approximations. It'll vary from program to program. Some people take more. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone taking less, but some people do take a little bit more time, and that's totally fine. I think the most recent APA average was like 7 years or something to finish this. But generally, you're working within a 5-year timeline. Okay. And so another part of what am I getting into is kind of like why you would want to have this. So getting a PhD is usually going to be required if you want to become a professor in that field. In some departments, like you can get a master's and that's enough to be a professor, but in psychology, you need a PhD. But it's not all that it's used for. It can also be useful for getting a lot of jobs outside of academia, but you don't necessarily need a PhD for that. And so what I mean by outside of academia is if you're working for like, if you are a data analyst for a company, or you want to work for a research lab that isn't tied to a college or something like that, there are other jobs out there. And you may or may not need a PhD for those most of the time. I don't think you do. You do need a PhD, as far as I understand, to be a clinician as well as a researcher, but you might not need that degree to be a clinician. It varies with what type of clinical work you want to do. And they have different degrees for that. It's also worth knowing that if you're like, 5 years for a PhD is a lot. I don't really know that this is what I want to agree to. There are tuition-free or subsidized master's programs, and it's worth doing a search and looking at those. I've been told that Europe tends to have cheaper and pretty excellent master's programs. I didn't do this option myself, but that because I've just stayed in the US my whole life, essentially. One question that's coming up, is there a choice in class selection? There is a little bit. So there's usually requirements within the program. Like our program, part of it is focused on cognition. So we have to take a class in cognition, like that's a requirement. So there will be like a few that are required, but then there's nothing really stopping you from taking an extra class here or there that you think is going to be helpful for you. It's usually just a conversation you want to have with your advisor to be like, hey, managing my time, like you don't want to be like, I'm going to take 5 classes this semester, because then like they take up a lot more work and time than they did in undergrad. So you do have choices. There are some requirements. It's a good discussion to have with your advisor. And anyone else, that was a question from the chat. Feel free to chime in if you have a different opinion. Okay, and then real quick before we go into timelines and all the materials that you need and how to apply and everything like that, one thing that we wanted to talk about, because we did notice that some of you are coming in here with varying levels of where you are. So some of you are a little bit more early on in undergrad, some of you are further along. So just real quick, if you haven't gotten involved in research, we just wanted to say that whether or not you plan to go to grad school, like if you're coming here because you're just like, I want to know more about this, we just wanted to say that even if you don't know yet, or maybe you know that you don't want to go to grad school, it's still worth getting involved in research because it's a great way to get hands-on learning and experience. It connects you with faculty and grad students that can help you further your career. Usually when I work with my students, I'm really excited to help them pursue whatever it is they want to pursue. Most of us don't expect our students to be like carbon copies of us. So, it's not like, well, this person can only help me be a grad student, or they can only help me be a faculty. That's not necessarily the case. A lot of us have colleagues who maybe do different things. So it's not limiting in that aspect. And getting involved in research also helps you apply what you've learned in the classroom. So me, for example, I don't learn well just like reading and being told stuff. And so when I got involved in research, it actually really helped me apply a lot of what I was learning about the brain and how it works and all that stuff. And it helped me be a better student in general too. It looks great on a CV resume, and in general, it's really fun and interesting. And like something that Inga Marie is putting in the chat, it's also a really good chance to even see if you like doing research, because if you go to grad school, that's most of what you'll be doing. Like I said, you spend a couple years in the classes, but for the most part, you're doing research in a PhD program. So it's a really good chance to see, like, do I even like this enough to do it for the next, 5-ish plus years? I will note that oftentimes when you get involved in research with professors at your university, a lot of times this isn't going to pay you, but you can work with faculty about like how much time you spend in the lab versus how much time you need to focus on your classes or go to your job, because you're not the first student who's done this. A lot of students have to balance their job and research work, and faculty get that, and they'll be willing to work with you on that. And if you're lucky, sometimes they'll have a grant and be like, I can pay you from a grant. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes you get lucky. So whenever you're trying to figure out how to get involved in research, some professors do have RAs. And so when we say that, we don't mean like resident assistant, we mean research assistant. Application forms on their website. But most of the time, even if they have those, you can just email them. Keep it relatively short, no more than maybe a paragraph, maybe two, if you're like, I like to cut my paragraph short. But this is just, tell them a sentence or two about you, like, I'm this year in undergrad and I'm majoring in this major. I read a little bit about what you do on your website. If you can manage to read a paper of those, that's even better, because you want to tell them how their work interests you. And then you just wrap that up with saying, hey, I'd really like to discuss, working in your lab if you have any openings. It's just a short, simple email. Sometimes you send these out and you won't get responses, and that's fine. I think I sent out emails to like 10 different faculty, and I only got maybe 2 interviews from that. It just means that sometimes they're busier than others. It also depends on what time of year. Some of them are recruiting constantly, but a lot of times if you can do it in the beginning of the semester or even a little bit before, that can help your chances. Yeah, lots of good information in the chat too, if you're able to look at that. And I just wanted to say at the end here, because again, we have a range of mentees coming in. It's not ever really too late to start to get involved with this. Even graduated students can sometimes work in the lab as well. It's usually just up to that faculty's discretion. So it never hurts to at least reach out. And even if they can't take you on, they might know somebody who can. So it never hurts, just reach out and ask. And this is all about getting involved in research in undergrad. Yes, Eileen.
Can I just say one more thing about getting involved in research in undergrad? Because Inga Marie made a great point that completely is so true. We get so many applicants for our undergrad RA positions in our lab that the ones that aren't specific about why they want to be in our lab don't stand out at all. So it's so important to say specifically why you're interested in that lab in particular.
Definitely don't spam email all the professors in the department and say, I'm looking for research, can I join your lab, period. People just won't reply, because we can tell we get a lot of those kind of non-specific emails.
Yeah. And those are great points to carry with you, even with other jobs you apply for, because moving forward, you're going to have to say, like, you have to show whoever you're applying to, whether it's, at college or if it's outside of here and you're getting a job elsewhere, you do have to be like, I really want to work with you. You have to show that kind of interest to really be a good applicant. So that's a great point, even research and grad school aside. Okay, so we're going to move on to, this is a potential timeline, and I want to just highlight that this is potential, because oftentimes whenever we bring this timeline up, it can stress students out, because you might be like, oh, I haven't done that yet, or I don't know how I'm going to have time to fit that. The timeline does not have to be exactly like this. This is one that you can follow. There is room to wiggle around. Obviously, if you're doing things a little bit later, it might feel a little bit more stressful. You might feel like you're running out of time. I have some colleagues who did a lot of this like within the span of a month or 2. I wouldn't recommend it, but it can be done. So don't freak out. There's always ways that you can move things around, and talking to your mentors is also a good way to kind of see how you can move things around to be able to get things done. So don't freak out about meeting the specific timeline. It's fine. So what I think about this timeline is that it actually starts not after you finish your junior year, but it actually starts during your junior year. So Spring of junior year is a great time to start studying for the GRE, start looking into potential research advisors and potential backup advisors for each program. We will talk about in, I think, a couple more slides about how to pick your research advisors and how to search for them. So I'm not just expecting you to know how to do that. That's usually a good time to start doing those things, just to give you a lot of time. And then the summer before you start your senior year is a great time to try and take the GRE at least once by July. And I say that because that allows you enough time to study up and take it 1 to 2 more times if you want higher scores. Just because I think there's some amount of processing time. It's been a while since I took it, but I think it can take sometimes like 6 weeks or so. There are some questions coming up about if the GRE is optional, is it still worth taking? I think that totally depends on, like I said, that's why I suggest that you look into potential research advisors before this, so you can determine whether or not the GRE is needed for all of those programs, because that information should be available for those programs. And if it's not, there's usually someone you can email, graduate admissions for the program or something like that. The GRE is expensive. It costs about, I checked today and it was $205 for each test in the US. But you can check to see if you qualify for a fee reduction. And I put that link in here. If you filled out the FAFSA, if you get financial aid, chances are you probably will qualify for a fee reduction. So it's definitely worth looking into that. And yes, the GRE does immediately tell you your quantitative and qualitative score, but the essays that you wrote have to actually be graded. And so that will take a little bit longer. So pretty much as soon as you take it the first time, you can figure out if you need to take it again. I think the last time I took it, it was like at the end of October, and I decided that if I did it any later than that, it wouldn't make it by the December 1st deadlines. Percentiles, you'll have to look up. You can just look them up, like, you know, remember the numbers you got, and you just have to look up the percentiles on the website. Like, you can just Google GRE percentiles. And then moving into August and October, so now that you're in the fall, you might be in your senior year, you might not be. Like I said, if you're taking a gap year, that's totally fine. That's great. It actually often helps you more than anything else. But it depends on what you do with that gap year. Again, that's something that you can talk to your mentor that you get matched with. But in August and October, this is a great time to start putting together your statement of purpose and your CV, and importantly, sending it for edits. You don't just want to assume that you can write this really well and then move forward. Some of you may be really great at writing, but you want to have somebody else look at it because maybe you forgot to put in something in there that's really great that you've done, and they might help you find that. We will also talk more about all these materials in a few slides. So this is also a great time to start emailing those potential grad advisors that you identified. And again, this is, you introduce yourself pretty shortly. You have to express interest and a basic knowledge of their work. So I'm not expecting that you've read like 10 papers, but I am expecting that you've read at least a couple. You have some idea of what they do and that it's interesting to you, and you're able to talk about that and be like, hey, I saw that you studied this and that you studied this, and that's really interesting. And I, you know, wondered if maybe if you did, you know, it this other way, what would happen? There's a lot of, we can talk about different ways to write that, but you just have to know what they do, be able to express an interest in it, be able to engage with their work in some form, but you don't have to be an expert. They're not expecting that. But you also want to do this so that you can see who's taking new grad students. Because if you just apply cold, first of all, your name isn't really going to stick out in the application process. Like, these faculty are getting emails from other students who know to email them before they apply, and they remember those names. And so if you don't, you're kind of just in the masses that applied without reaching out. And secondly, you want to know if they're taking new grad students, because these applications can cost anywhere from like $0 to $120 to apply to. And you don't want to spend that money and then find out that you didn't get in just because they didn't have any room in their lab. So this is always good. You should always want to email these potential advisors before you go. It lets you know them, it lets them know you, and it can potentially keep you from applying to something that either wasn't a great fit or you wouldn't have been able to get in because they didn't have room or time, etc. And if you don't get a response, follow up after 2 weeks. There's nothing wrong with just being like, hey, just checking in on this. Excited to hear back from you. It doesn't have to be a whole thing. Okay. And then moving into September and October of the fall, this is when you want to make sure that you have 4 good letter writers. And I'm underlining good here because this hasn't happened to me that I'm aware of, but I was told once in undergrad that there are some professors, I don't know of any here at UConn that would do this, but I guess there are some that exist that you just say, hey, can you write me a letter of rec? And they'll say yes. And you don't know if they're going to write nice stuff about you or if they're going to write something mean. I have good faith in most of the faculty that I know that they wouldn't do that, but it never hurts to just be like, hey, do you feel you could write me a good letter of recommendation or maybe a strong letter of recommendation, just to kind of put that out there and maybe make sure that they're considering that. So this is when you want to make sure that you have 4 of them, and I'll talk about why you want 4 in a second. You should also want to have a complete, and I call this the good draft of statement of purpose and CV. This is something that it might not be ready to actually apply with, but it has enough of the main content that you want in there that you can send it to your letter writers and they can kind of think about, like, remind themselves of all the stuff that you've done as they're writing their letter of rec for you. So that's why I'm calling it the good draft. And then November and December, you want to craft your final versions of your statement of purpose and CV. And this is because, at least in psychology, a lot of applications are due by December 1st. And then as you're doing that in November, you want to remind yourself of, like, okay, when are all these letters due? When are all these applications due? And when are the actual letters due? Sometimes they're due at the same time. Sometimes they're not. I'm going to show you an example of a spreadsheet that I had to keep those things organized. But as you're moving into November, you want to keep track of that so that you can remind your letter writers. I did 1 month, 2 weeks, and the week of when the letters were due. You can discuss with them how often they'd want reminders, but I think that's a fair, like, it's coming up in a month, it's in 2 weeks, it's due this week kind of thing. And just to let you know, in terms of being able to plan for this financially, the applications, again, might cost anywhere from $0 to $120 each. And we're going to talk about getting your letter writers more as well, because I see there's some stuff in the chat going on about that. And then you get to move on to early spring, which is the usually exciting part where you get results and interviews. So you get invited to talk to some of the people you applied with. And just know that for this, in terms of financial planning, a lot of the interview travel expenses will be expenses. I got a little bit of the Southern back in me. But most of these expenses will be paid for by the program. I say most just because, like, if you want to get lunch or something in the layover between your flights, like, you're going to have to pay for that. There are some clinical psych programs that don't pay for you to travel, but some of them do, as far as I understand. I think, most don't pay for you. Okay. Well, that's interesting to know. And I'm glad that we had both Asia and Inga Marie here to let us know that. Okay. All right. So moving on to picking your advisor. I always say advisor over institution. And the reason why I do that is because in undergrad, I think it mattered a lot about, like, when I went to my undergrad institution, I was like, okay, do they have a good psych program? Do they have a good program for what I want to major in? Because at the time, you want to make sure that your degree, you're learning everything you need to. And most of that relies on, like, a large variety of faculty and resources. But when you're moving into grad school, what you learn starts to, it depends a little bit on the institution, but it starts to matter, like you're learning a lot more closely with your advisor, like they're the main person that you're talking to and working with. And so I think that you should always value advisor over institution. It's not like super important that you get into like an Ivy League school if the person you're working with like doesn't return your emails or doesn't talk to you. So, you want to pick someone that you would like to work with. Your boss is more important than the place that you work for sometimes, kind of headset to have. So whenever you're trying to pick these advisors, it's always good as like a first step to check with your current advisor and any grad students if you are already in a lab. But this tends to be true for most. Oh yeah. So I was also just saying, like, you can ask them, like, how did they feel about it? But I think that it tends to be true for most grad students that your advisor controls your experience more. My brain left me for a second there. Sorry about that. And you can also ask these grad students, maybe not even in your lab, but if you know some that are in your field, like a lot of you have TAs maybe that are grad students, and you can even ask them, what would you look for when you're applying to grad school, or what helps you have a better experience? And again, just reiterating that institution can look impressive. What's more important are the opportunities and the research you're able to achieve, and advisors are the key to getting you there. Okay. So when you're trying to choose an advisor, some of the things that I think are important, again, it really helps to talk to the different grad students that maybe you work with or that are in your field or in the lab that you're in. I think that the first thing that comes up for me is the research, because that's the work you're going to be doing. Sometimes you'll have advisors who let you go a little bit outside of the realm of what they do, but for the most part, you're there to learn from them. And so you want to have a pretty core tie to what they do. You want to at least care a lot about it. Even if it's not exactly what you want to be really close to it. So to do that, most of them will have a website, or they'll have their papers posted maybe on their university's website, where you can read the abstracts or the intro and discussion sections of a few papers. So I'm not saying that you got to sit down and read 20 papers a day trying to find like a research advisor. Usually it's enough to get from the abstract, from the introduction and the discussion. Sometimes you only need the abstract, but if you're still confused, the intro and discussion are really great to kind of clear things up. Just to see what work they're doing, and is that interesting to you? Does it make you want to know more about it? Does it make you think, oh, what if you did this? Does it make you come up with other questions? That kind of stuff. And then I think the second most important thing is their mentoring style, because we're talking about, this person is kind of your boss, but it's your boss that hopefully you're going to work with on a pretty regular basis. And so things that you might want to take into consideration when you're looking at their website, which hopefully they keep it updated. Again, this is a fine thing to find out later too, just by asking. But you want to see, on their website, how many grad students do they have listed? And you want to know that because it leads to this question of, do you prefer hands-on or hands-off advising? So if I'm looking at a faculty's website and they have 7 grad students, I'm starting to wonder how much time do each of those grad students get to have. I'm not saying that more than 4 or 5 is a reason to not work with someone. It may be the case that they're able to spend enough attention on each of those grad students, or maybe they have really good postdocs or something like that in the lab too. But I would just say that if you know that you want a lot of attention, you might want to look at labs that have, less grad students, maybe more 2 or 3. But again, these are things to kind of keep in mind. They're not like a nail in the coffin. It's something that you'll also have to think about whenever you go to interviews. And then there's other stuff happening in the chat, like Inga Marie brought up, how often do you meet with each of your students individually? Again, I'm putting off these questions just because I'm I wouldn't ask someone that in the first email to be like, hey, do you have openings? But that might be something that once you've asked that question, right, and they respond to you like, yes, I'm taking students, there's no reason why you can't start having that discussion of being like, hey, well, like, how often do you meet with them? The hands-on thing, Leah asked in the chat, how do you know if they're hands-on? Like I said, I think sometimes it's tied to the amount of grad students. That's a very rough estimation. And that's why Inga Marie's chiming in with being like, well, actually, there can be a lot of other factors that tell if they're hands-on or hands-off. And so that's why after you have that initial email, you can, maybe follow up. Like if they're like, yeah, go ahead and apply. You can be like, hey, I just had some other questions. Can we, chat? What do you expect out of your students? How often do you meet with them? Those types of things. Other students that I've talked to take into account a list of other factors. It really depends on what you care about. So some people will look at publishing history. How many papers have they published in the last 2 years or something like that? Because these are often people who are considering becoming professors themselves, because you need to have a large amount of publications. And so they tend to think, if the mentor's publishing a lot, I'm going to publish a lot. There are lots of different things that can go into why or why not faculty is having a lot of papers lately. So that's always it's a hazy thing that I don't put high up there, but if it's something you're interested in, it's always a discussion you can have. Some people look at whether or not the faculty is pre or post tenure, based on how much experience they're going to have. They use that to gauge like how much experience they have mentoring, which again, it's a hazy metric of that. Or how motivated they are to publish papers could be another thing that people look at for pre and post tenure. And what tenure is whenever you become a professor, you spend like 5 to 7-ish years, I think, trying to make sure that you contribute enough to the university. What you have to do varies across programs, but usually it involves like, did you get a certain amount of publications? That tends to be like a huge thing that we hear about. There are other things that can be involved: service to the community, teaching, grants, things like that. So that's a hazy gauge. Again, it's why I'm not really focusing on it, but some grad students do. Definitely ask ones around you. You may also want to look at, do they have collaborations? Will you get a chance to work with other labs often? Are they bringing in grants? Will they be able to pay you? Usually, if you're getting an offer, in my experience in psychology and neuroscience fields, if you're getting an offer, they will be able to pay for you for at least 5 years. But it never hurts to check their grants if that's something that you're really worried about. Do you care about where you're going to be location-wise? Are you like, man, I don't want to stay in the Northeast anymore. I want to go somewhere else. Other factors that you can care about. Always great to talk to faculty and grad students and see what they care about. Research and mentoring style are just the top 2 things for me. And then the other thing that I think is important, but I'm putting this later because you might not be able to really get a good gauge on this until you actually meet them in person, or maybe you have a few Skype calls or something, which may be more likely for the spring, to be honest. This is just kind of, do you get along well with them? Like, do you like them as a person? It also bleeds into things like, you want to find out what their expectations are for their grad students. Like, I expect my grad student to be in the lab like 9 to 5 every single day. Or, they expect you to churn out so many papers, get back to them so really quickly. You just want to find out what they're like. But again, this might be something that you have to wait until interviews. You can also start getting this information by talking to current grad students. But again, if you do that, talk to somebody else before you send an email like that, just to make sure that the way you're asking it doesn't come across as rude or anything, because you don't want to be like, are they a nice person? You just want to be like, hey, do you enjoy working there, or something like that. Lots of good things in the chat. I'm glad that we're saying this, because there are a lot of really good things that Inga Marie and other faculty and grad students are putting in. So definitely be sure to check that out. Okay, moving on to the search. I'm also trying to be cognizant of time, because I realize we're almost at the hour mark. We're about halfway through, and I'll try and not take up so much time I'm pontificating anymore. So when you're searching for programs or faculty to work with, again, ask the professors and the grad students that you currently work with. If you're not in a lab, you can start talking to maybe a grad student or a faculty member has taught a class that you really like. You can start talking to them. Most of us are pretty happy to answer questions. We like doing that kind of thing. And you can do this even if you're in a lab and you're like, I don't really want to do the type of work that this lab does anymore. You can still find out that they might know other people in the field. Like, we talk to other scientists. Like, I talk to people who aren't necessarily doing exactly what I do, or even sometimes things that are even close to it. Like, we have connections. We don't just stay within our own bubble. So it can be helpful to talk to them anyway, because they might be able to point you to someone who can help you. So the next thing is that if you or someone else has gone to a conference recently, a lot of the times, I say ask for the conference program or book of abstracts, but most of the time this is actually online. If you were able to go to it physically, they might hand it to you when you go, but usually you can find it. And this is kind of a rough way to let you see maybe the most recent research being done and which labs are doing it. So typically, you can just kind of look, and sometimes it's separated by sections. And then you can be like, I really want to look at maybe like memory, and they'll have like a whole list of abstracts about people who study memory. And you can just kind of look through, read these quick abstracts and see what interests you. And then you can try and look at the authors listed under that abstract, see what labs, sometimes it's multiple labs, but usually it's like one that they're coming from, and just kind of start doing your search there and finding people that way. Other things could be if you happen to read an interesting paper, and by that I mean a peer-reviewed research paper, then you might want to look into the authors or see who the authors are referencing. And again, I just wanted to state that my priorities for picking a school is, number one, the advisor, number two, the potential backup advisor. I think it's always good to have a backup advisor just because it's nice to know that there's someone else that you might be happy to work with. Maybe you could collaborate between those two. But also, if something happens and for some reason or another, maybe your advisor can't stay at the institution, or they're not able to, they have something going on in their life where they can't put as much focus on you, it gives you someone else that you can go to, which is why I like to say that you should apply to a place that has not just someone you want to work with, but an additional person that you also would like to work with. And then I think third most important is the program itself, as well as the community and what resources are available. So if you're like, I really want to do brain imaging research, and I specifically want to do like functional brain imaging research, you don't necessarily want to go to a place where like they don't have an MRI, because then it makes it harder to do your research. So it's important to assess that kind of thing. There are some institutions that maybe they couple with a med school and they're able to use their resources. Again, this is something that you can ask over emails or over Skypes and chats. And then 4 is the institution itself. Like, especially if you want to be like a faculty at a research institution, you want to have gotten your PhD from like a research institution. There are different levels of this. R01 is something that gets thrown around a lot, to be honest with you. I've only gone to R01s. I don't really know what the other things are. Something that you can, R1. Oh, R01's a grant, right? Yeah, thanks, Inga Marie. Yeah, R1 universities. Again, please talk to faculty who know more than me about what these different institutions mean. Okay, so once you have kind of put together this list of advisors, this is when you're going to talk them over with the current person that you're working with, or maybe if that's not available to you, you can also just talk to a faculty member in the field you trust. So like, you don't have to have just one mentor and that's the person you work with. It's true that you can have mentors for other things, and maybe there's another faculty that you're just like, I just really like you. I like the decisions you make. Let's talk about it. But just, it's good to talk them over with someone who's in the field. So once you've made the list, you can ask, like if you've been working with them and they really know you and your working style, you can ask if they think that any of the advisors you've listed either should or maybe shouldn't be on the list. Sometimes this means that, oh, you have this person on your list. I know that they're about to become a department head, and that means that they're going to be busier. They might not have as much time for you. So maybe you don't want to go into that lab this year. Or maybe they're like, hey, you missed this person who would be a really great person for you to work with. You should add them to your list. It's just a really good way to kind of get it checked through by someone who knows who's doing what, so you don't miss any good opportunities. And then once you have your list and you're like, this is my final list, these are how many I'm applying to. I think I did 11. You know, people, it depends on different programs how many you want to apply to, because there's different levels of competitiveness, et cetera, et cetera. Again, you're going to want to talk to people who know you a little bit better, but you can also talk to the different mentors you get matched with as well, because there may be some field specific things. And again, this is just like we've been talking before, you're going to have information about you. You're going to know their work enough to talk about why it's exciting to you. Are they taking grad students? Just reiterating what I said before, give, 1 or 2 weeks for a response. If you don't get one, it's just a simple reminder email that you're going to send that's just like, hey, love to hear back from you on this. Really excited to chat with you. If it gets to the point, which I think this is relatively rare, that you have, waited 1 or 2 weeks and reminded them like 3 or 4 times and you haven't heard back, that might be just a signal that you might just need to remove them off your list. Because if they're taking like over a couple months to respond to you and you're interested and your email's polite, have somebody else look over it before you send it if you're worried about that, then that might mean that they just don't have the time or something's going on. And so you might just want to move on. Okay. So moving on into more of the application materials. We're going to talk about all of these with we're going to focus mostly on the CV, the statement of purpose, and the letters of rec, because those are the things that I think can take the most amount of work to do. I'm not going to talk a ton about the GRE, the transcript, or the writing sample, just because writing sample was not really something I ever had to submit. But I just wanted you to know, here are the different materials that exist. You can bring these up with the people that you're matched with, because they may have a different experience or they might just know more than I do. Okay, so the CV, this is something that there's always this question that comes up, what's the difference between a CV and a resume? CV's longer, CV has more detail. It's literally like the history of life or something in Latin. It's like curriculum vitae, something like that. Look it up if you're really interested. But this is a document that's going to include your education, any research experience you have, if you have relevant work experience. So some people that might mean like if you're going into clinical, maybe you haven't done research, but maybe like I had a colleague who he worked at a mental health hotline for like 2 years. That's something that you can put on if it's relevant. If you have any publications or presentations, if you have a publication in undergrad, like kudos to you, that's amazing. Any volunteering that you've done, any skills that you think are relevant. And so just so you know, this can be more than 1 page. I think mine when I applied to grad school was 2 pages. It is meant to be long, like longer than a resume, but you also don't want to be filling it with fluff. And we do have in the Google folder that Eileen sent out the link to, we do have lots of different examples from current grad students of their CV from whenever they were applying to grad school. So you can take a look at those and get an idea of maybe what to include.
And I have not sent out the link to that folder yet to the mentees, but I will do that soon.
Just kidding. She's gonna send that out soon. I got an email with it. But okay, so if you want to get started on that now and you're like, I don't know what to include, a good way to approach that is to start from the beginning of when you started college. Some of you can go into high school, but I'm just going to say college just as a general thing, and list all the experiences that you had, even if they don't seem relevant. Like you worked at, an ice cream shop, like you babysat for however long. I'm talking like everything. And then once you've made that list, ask your friends, ask, your mentors, people that you work with. When you think you've listed them all, be like, can you think of anything else? And then once you have that list, then you can kind of start figuring out what's going to be relevant for your CV, for whatever you're applying to. And when you're doing that, think broadly about your experiences because they might be more relevant than you think. Like, for example, if you worked in an administrative office, or like you worked as a secretary or something, that can be important because if you decide that you maybe want to be a lab manager for a research lab, you want to be like, hey, I can organize all these things. I can make phone calls. I can create like ways of organizing lab equipment. Like those are all things that you can talk about. So don't cut anything out. Think about it for a minute, see if there's anything that might apply. Again, great to have this conversation with friends or mentors that you have. And then I want to say that you want to keep this list of experience, like that big long list, even if they don't all make it to the CV, because you might find they're helpful for later applications and you just did all that work compiling them. You don't want to just throw that away. Save that somewhere, keep it. It might be helpful later. Okay. The most important thing that I find with students that I really want to address here is do not undersell yourself whenever you're writing your CV. A lot of times I'll have students who give me their CV to look over and they'll say, oh, I participated in research. That doesn't really describe anything. When you think about it, whenever we have people who come in to studies that we collect data from, they also participated in research. It covers a broad spectrum of things. So what you want to do is be specific while also remaining concise. So did you just participate or did you actually recruit and schedule participants and collect data? That's the kind of information you want to put in because it gives a much more specific view of the things that you have done. And that's going to be way more helpful for someone looking at your CV. A lot of the feedback I get from this is that it can feel like bragging, but keep in mind that you're just being honest. And a lot of times we've been conditioned to not want to admit the really cool things that we've done. So just keep in mind that you're being honest. So like one example I could think of is when I'm writing my CV, I can say like, oh, I've conducted research. But I can also say that, oh, I was the lead on research on, X effect on Y. And neither option is less true, but the second one definitely sounds better to say, yeah, I was the lead research on this project. If it's true, put it on there, just don't undersell yourself. I know it can feel like bragging. It's just being honest. It's just being truthful to what happened. So do not worry about that. Now, if you start lying on it and you're like, yeah, I was the head PI, then like that's a whole other issue. But anyway, that's why it's good to have someone look over your CV. So like what I said earlier, you want to give enough information while still staying concise. So working in a lab is not an informative sentence to have on the CV. You want to actually talk about the research you did. So one example could be like, I conducted a study on the effects of TDCS, which is a neuromodulation technique, on the prefrontal cortex for object use. Talk to your mentor or something about what jargon is appropriate and what's going to make sense. This jargon here made sense for the different neuroscience programs I was applying to, but maybe you want to change that if you're applying to other fields where maybe they don't encounter the word TDCS or the words prefrontal cortex super often. And always, always, always run your CV by your advisor or someone in that field. I don't think you should ever send a CV out without having somebody else look over it just so they can catch things. People are asking a lot about like different, how many lab experiences you need. It's super variable. Sometimes like I worked in a lab for a year and a half, but I always had an independent project. And so whenever like I had a project that I led myself, and then some people are like, well, I worked in 3 or 4 different labs, and I mostly like helped with other projects. They can be super variable. You just have to know basically how to talk about it, how to sell it while being honest. So, you don't feel like you have to like, I can't apply it because I haven't done, X thing. just talk to your mentor about it. They can tell you whether or not you have a strong application because they get these applications. The statement of purpose and the personal statement is also something that's typically difficult for people to write. What this is it's an essay about your relevant experiences. Sometimes they have a specific prompt that they want you to respond to, but a lot of times their prompt is going to follow something that this format will cover. So the usual format that I've seen is you're going to have like a short intro paragraph with what you would call your thesis statement about why you would be a good fit for X program. And that's usually, I call it a thesis statement because it's usually going to summarize the points you're going to make. So this is going to be like, because of my experiences with, this lab and this hospital and these classes, I think I would be a great fit for whatever program. That's what I mean by thesis statement. And then you'll move on to like summaries of your relevant experiences, what you did, what you feel like they taught you, how they're going to be relevant to what you're applying to potentially. And then that is like the largest part of your personal statement usually, is just describing those different experiences. And then you end generally with a summary of why you're excited for that position. So again, some of these programs will have prompts for that, but generally they're going to want the things that you'll address if you're going in this format. I didn't see a ton of variation when I was applying. And I think that you always need to include why you want to pursue research in that program, why you're interested in the topic of whoever's lab you're applying to. Maybe if it's a broader topic and they're just addressing a piece of it, that's fine. But you need to talk about why you specifically want to do research. Sometimes people choose to talk about this in a more personal way. Like, I'm interested in memory because of like family illnesses that have impacted memory and wanting to know why that works. Some people, it's totally not personal. It's just, I became really interested in this because of this one class I took. Like, I've heard different things. Some faculty are like, I love the personal. Some are like, I hate it. So honestly, just be genuine with it. And I think that honesty and the genuineness of why you're interested will come through. So just make sure that you're genuine. You don't have to feel like you have to write, this big narrative thing. But it's also fine if you are like, yeah, there was a personal reason for it. Just be genuine and have someone look over it. Right. So GRE and transcripts. Like we mentioned earlier, because this comes up and not every program is requiring GRE scores, you want to check and see if they require it. And also, a lot of them are not going to require the subject tests unless you're switching to a very different field from undergrad to grad. So for example, I got my bachelor's in neuroscience. I was applying to a lot of psych programs. I took the psych subject test because I didn't know that I didn't need it. I thought, I was like, oh, well, I have to take this too, right? Because there's a subject test for it. Not necessarily. Now, if you're going from like mathematics to psychology or something, you might want to consider taking it. But generally, you don't need it if you're staying in the same field. If it's possible, like I said, save money or try and look into those financial aid waivers to take the test twice. And again, I say you want to take it once by July or August, just because it gives you enough time to see if you're weak on anything, study up, take it again, just in case. I think it's always good to leave room for one, at least, makeup of the GRE, just because so much in taking that first test could just be like nerves and the newness of being in there. Like when I went to take it, they had to do like a whole like metal detector thing, and that was very stressful to me. Other people thought it was fine. But just give yourself enough time to take it twice, just because any mistakes you may make in the first one could just be due to like jitters. And just know that like, if you don't have the exact scores that you want or the exact GPA that you want, just know that if you have a lower GRE score or you have a lower GPA, that a lot of times this can actually be outweighed by experience. So, maybe you didn't do so hot on those exams, but you've done all of this great, awesome research work, or you really have the tenacity and you're really interested in moving this along, and they can tell that you're enthusiastic. And also just keep in mind that, like, you know, the reason why they ask for your transcripts sometimes is so they can see if, like, maybe you had a rough freshman, sophomore year. Not uncommon, totally happens pretty often. There was a lot of shock for me going into undergrad from high school. But if they see that, you know, it gets better, like your grades are getting better over time, then that is evidence of something. So don't feel like that you're canceled out just because maybe your GRE scores are a little bit lower or your GPA is a little bit lower. Definitely feel like you can have that conversation, and just know that most faculty know that that doesn't define the type of grad student you'll be. Okay. So more specific information on letters of rec. So typically you need 3, but I always recommend finding 4, just because maybe there's an issue where one of the 3 can't submit for one reason or another. Maybe there's an issue with the software that's running the application system, or maybe they meant to submit your letter, but like they have been super tired because they're writing a grant and they fell asleep and they missed the deadline. You know, you just always want to have that like one safety net. So try and get 4. A lot of times in the application, you can rank them in some way. Even if it's not explicitly, I'm ranking this, you can put them in the order that you would rank them. So definitely do that. And if possible, these should be faculty members that you've worked with, or because trust me, I only had 1 faculty member that I'd worked in their research lab in undergrad. So there was no way I was getting 3 that like I've worked in their lab. But these could be faculty that you've had lots of interactions with during a class, or you've gone to their office hours a few times and you've had like good back and forth. They need to be able to know who you are. So if you are currently someone who is taking classes and you're not talking to the professors, do that. I know it can like seem scary at first, but they want you to be interested. Like they want to talk to you about the cool stuff that they're talking about in class too. So if you're not talking to them yet, just start doing that. Doesn't have to be super serious. Can just be like, hey, can you tell me more about that topic that you mentioned in the last lecture or something like that. Doesn't have to be a big thing. But you want more than one faculty member to know who you are, what type of work you do, how good is the quality of your work. If you've worked closely with grad students, they're great. I love us. We're all hardworking people, but we don't have the experience or the clout to be able to say we know what makes a good grad student. So typically letters from us aren't going to hold as much. And that's the honest truth with it. So definitely try to get faculty members to write you a letter. And you want to try and secure these letter writers by October, because if you're looking at due dates that are due in December, A, you want to give your letter writers plenty of time to put that in their schedule. And B, you want to have, basically, if you're trying to secure these and you're like, oh, I just got to get them secured before, October, but then you find out that one of them says, I'm sorry, I can't write you the 11 letters that you need for the 11 different programs. You want to know that now so that you have a little bit of time to find somebody else. So try and get these secured by October. And then always, 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 when you're asking for anything, I think from your advisors, but also anyone who's helping you apply to something, you always want to be grateful and offer anything you can to make writing your letters easier. Drafts of your CV and your statement of purpose in near final stages, again, doesn't have to be perfect, needs to have the content that's most likely going to be there. And I also like to give them an Excel sheet with information about the programs and the due dates for the letters, just because it helps them stay organized. Again, if you're applying to like 11 of them, there's no way that they can keep all that in their head, because they have you and then maybe like 5 at least other students who are also doing similar things in terms of applications. So do what you can to make their lives easier. It's going to give them a little bit more of a positive feeling when they're writing your letter. So do what you can. And I'll show you an example, I think in the next slide of, yeah, it's the next slide. Sorry, this was abruptly bright. I should have thought about that. This is bright. I'm sorry, I didn't think about this. Okay, but this is an example of the Excel sheet that I used. So some of this is mostly for me. You can do a shortened version of this for your letter writers, but you want to be like, okay, these are the faculty I'm applying to, some of which I'm applying to in the same university. So I went ahead and like merged and did things there. Here's the institution, the specific program, because again, sometimes these programs, sometimes the people that you want to work with, even though they're doing similar stuff, one might be in a neuroscience program, one might be in a psychology program, and you don't want your letter writer to be like, this person would be great for, you know, psychology program, and then that's not the program you're applying to, because then people start to wonder, how much information did the student give their writers? The due date, I think it's also nice sometimes to give them the research focus. They don't have to know the application materials. That was definitely more for me, as was the application process. But what I would say, so what I put in application process was whether or not the letters of rec were electronic or whether they were by mail. And I think that might not be an issue as much anymore, but I think that it's always good to let them know that, because then they can plan for like how long it takes mail physically to get there. Yes, Sahil's actually putting in really great points about if you want them to write about specific things in their letters. Okay, we've reached the end. I've taken up an hour of your time, so I think this is a good place to start. So obviously there's a lot of different questions here. That's great. We wanted to generate a lot of questions. It gives you a lot of points to talk about with the mentors that you're going to be matched with. The chat is going to be saved. This will be put up, hopefully, if the recording looks all right. So before we all leave here, I just wanted to give you some tips for the meetings you're going to have with the mentors you've been matched with. I think it's really helpful if you can come to these meetings with a very short, I'm talking like a minute, like, hey, this is who I am kind of thing. Just include like what year you're in, so that lets them gauge like what stage of your career you might be working on or getting ready for, what research, or if you haven't done research, any relevant work that you've done, and what you're interested in. Those are great things that really help your mentor figure out how to work with you, because I know you all filled out the form and it lists some of that, but it's really good just to like remind them as well whenever you start the meeting. And that introduction is actually really great to practice, and you're going to end up using it later on in some form or another. So it's just good practice to get it now. If you have questions specifically about graduate application questions, just check and see if they happen to be on these slides. But also know that like you can just refer to these slides if you want to be like, hey, do you have a different opinion? Because like I said, this is limited by like what I know and the people that I've talked to. People have different, you've seen it in the chat, people have different opinions on things. They have different experiences that are going to vary by program. The mentors will have access to these slides, so it's fine to be like, hey, in that presentation, she said this thing. What do you think about it? That's totally fine. It will not hurt my feelings if they're like, she's totally wrong. That is okay. If you have questions about what to pursue, so maybe you're coming to this meeting and you're like, I have no idea what I want to do. You know, like everyone is talking about applying to grad school. I don't even know if I want to do grad school or what research I want to do. That's fine. Just try and think about some things that have interested you in the past. What did you really like in your classes? What did you love learning about? Things like that. And you can have that kind of discussion. Most importantly, please do not be afraid to ask maybe what you think is a dumb question. They're not dumb. We're all in the business of learning and happy to help. Eileen's my advisor. I asked her like 2 days ago. I was like, hey, I know you can look at how many other papers have cited this one paper. I've known that for years and I don't know how to do it. And she told me how to do it. And there was like no issue there. So ask whatever you want to. This is meant to be like a safe place for you to get the information that you need. That is our job. That's what we signed up for. We want to give you whatever it is that you need. So ask anything. It's totally fine. If anyone judges you, that's a them problem. So, and along with that, if you're really not sure that you understand what your mentor is saying to you, we sometimes get really stuck in our jargon. There are a lot of terms that we throw around that like we don't always know. I didn't know what tenure was until I was like getting ready to apply to grad school. So if you're not sure what they're saying, just, you know, either ask them what they mean, or you can even be like, hey, so I think you're saying this, is that right? To just try and get the most out of it. Don't be afraid to ask them to repeat what they said or say it in a different way. It's fine. And trust me, they're used to it because we do that in most of our defenses. We're always like, I don't know what your question was. So this is not new to them. But yeah, that is everything I have for you all. Thank you for being here. I know this took, a little over an hour of your time, so I appreciate it. We will be sending out, I think Eileen will be sending out the emails soon, connecting you to your mentors.
Yep.
These slides will be available. If this recording worked, it might take me a couple days. I'll upload it and give you all a YouTube link, which should have subtitles as well. And we'll also be saving the group chat for you to look at the questions that have been asked. In the meantime, if you're having any issues, feel free to reach out to us, and thanks for coming.